The sterile airport air of Harbor Springs, Florida, suddenly turned cold. I was pulling my carry-on to the check-in when my phone buzzed. Credit card fraud alert. At the same time, the family chat group blew up. Mom, Dad, and my sister Lena were sending videos of a 5-star Caribbean resort. The bank agent asked if the $10,000 charge was mine. I looked at Lena's beaming face, her arm draped with designer bags in the photo. My lips curved into a chilling smile. No, I replied. It's family fraud. I tapped the lock button, typing one final text. Hope you're enjoying the trip. Good vacation. Then, I walked toward my gate. Naomi Bailey, 29 years old, had mastered the art of selective blindness. It was a crucial skill when dealing with her family, especially after she'd traded her independent life in Denver for the dusty, dependent reality back home in Maple Ridge, Ohio. But right now, standing in the sleek, impersonal concourse of the International Airport in Harbor Springs, Florida, even her best defenses were failing. My mind was already halfway to the gate, envisioning the brief, much-needed escape this trip offered, a weekend conference for Lunaris Gate Interactive that thankfully required zero interaction with my parents or sister. I was pulling my navy blue suitcase toward the check-in when my phone gave a frantic, high-pitched thrum, a notification I'd set for aggressive financial activity. Credit card fraud alert. I froze. Before I could even unlock the fraud notification, my family chat group, titled The Baileys, exploded. The screen lit up with a rapid-fire succession of photos and videos. My stomach immediately twisted. There was Mom, laughing a little too loudly, holding a flute of champagne next to a pristine infinity pool overlooking the turquoise Caribbean. There was Dad, looking relaxed in a linen shirt I knew he didn't own, his hand resting on a sign that read, "Welcome to St. Aurelia's premier 5-star resort." And then there was Lena. My 26-year-old sister, Lena, was the star of the show. Naturally, she was in a massive marble bathroom, submerged up to her shoulders in a bubble bath, grinning with a self-satisfied expression. The next photo was her posing in front of a boutique, draped in 2 enormous shopping bags with logos I recognized as frighteningly expensive. She captioned it simply, "I deserve this life, St. Aurelia vibes." The fraud alert now covered my entire screen, flashing red. A banker's voice, calm and detached, was already on the line. "Ms. Bailey, we've detected suspicious activity on your visa signature, totaling just over $10,000 in the last 3 days. Multiple transactions at the Grand Azure Hotel, high-end restaurants, a luxury spa, and several designer clothing stores, all located on the island of St. Aurelia. Can you confirm these transactions are authorized?" My head lifted slowly. St. Aurelia, the very place my family was currently enjoying their lucky contest prize trip, as they'd vaguely described it to me last week. The coincidences were not coincidences. The pit in my stomach hardened into stone. Lena hadn't won a trip. She had simply engineered one, and they had all let her. I stared at the image of Lena, beaming, clutching bags that represented roughly 3 months of my total disposable income. The sheer audacity of it was breathtaking. They weren't just taking the money I regularly transferred. They were now outright stealing my credit limit. They expected me to cover it, quietly, as always. I answered the bank agent with a chilling composure that surprised even myself. My voice was low, flat, and absolute. "No, these transactions are not authorized," I stated. The agent began running through the standard security protocol. "I understand. We can file a dispute claim, but before we proceed, I need to verify that this was not a transaction made by an immediate family member who you may have given your details to at some point." I focused on the smirk on Lena's face in the photo, the smugness that screamed, "You'll fix this. Naomi, you always do." The memory of the last year flashed through my mind. Every sacrifice, every late night, every thankless money transfer. "Absolutely not," I confirmed, my lips stretching into a humorless smile. "You can call it what you need to on your end, but to me, it's family fraud. Proceed with the lock and the dispute claim immediately. The reality of my life, the one I had fled from just an hour ago, was a sharp contrast to the luxury Lena was flaunting. Just days ago, I was sitting in the dingy, sunless living room of our old house in Maple Ridge, Ohio. I was dressed in the crisp, neat attire of a tech professional, my daily uniform for my remote job as an economic systems designer for Lunaris Gate, but my eyes held the heavy fatigue of someone carrying too much weight. Mom and Dad were sprawled on the worn sofa, barely moving, flipping through channels. Lena was curled up on a velvet armchair that clashed horribly with the decor, lazily scrolling on her tablet, occasionally demanding a rare, expensive artisanal snack. It had been a year since I'd abandoned my cozy, small apartment in Denver. A year since the frantic, tearful video call from Mom, explaining that Dad's accounting firm, where he'd worked for over 20 years, had abruptly folded. They were left with a crushing mortgage, mounting credit card debt, and zero savings. "Family comes first, Naomi," Mom had sobbed, a phrase she used with the precision of a scalpel. "You're the oldest. You have to sacrifice." I was the only one with a high-earning, fully remote job. I initially thought I'd help for just a few months. I requested a transfer to remote work at Lunaris Gate, packed up my life, and moved back to the stifling small town of Maple Ridge. A few months turned into a year. I became the sole provider, transferring over $3,000 every single month to cover their expenses, utilities, and debt payments. It was a silent, transactional arrangement where the thank yous had dried up long before the savings account did. My money became the default atmosphere of the house, taken for granted as naturally as the oxygen they breathed. Now, back in the present moment, standing amidst the hurried travelers in Florida, the bank agent confirmed the card was locked and the investigation was underway. The $10,000 luxury bubble had just burst. I looked at my phone screen, at the group chat that was still filling with Lena's giddy vacation stories, oblivious to the financial and legal cliff they were teetering on. I unlocked the chat and typed a single, cryptic message. "Hope you're enjoying the trip. Good vacation." I didn't wait for a reply, which I knew would be immediate and hysterical. I tucked the phone deep into my travel bag, the quiet click of the zipper a final, definitive sound. My steps were now firm, my posture straight. The exhaustion was gone, replaced by a cold, sharp resolve. I walked straight toward my plane, my eyes calm and empty of emotion, knowing that the storm was not approaching. I had already unleashed it. The instant I hit send on that cryptic two-word text, "Good vacation," the noise of the airport receded. It was as if a deafening internal hum had finally silenced, leaving a quiet, dangerous vacuum in its place. To understand the cold resolve that allowed me to trigger a criminal investigation against my own sister, you have to rewind to the moment the wires of my life were first deliberately crossed. The cost of the call. Exactly 12 months ago, I was perfectly happy. My life wasn't flashy, but it was mine. I was nestled in my compact, sun-drenched apartment in Denver, Colorado, surrounded by my favorite design books and the soft hum of my dual monitors. My job as an economic systems designer for Lunaris Gate Interactive was creatively demanding and financially stable. I dealt in virtual currencies and carefully balanced resource management in a fictional world, which ironically was far more logical than the real-world finances I was about to inherit. Then came the video call, the one that always felt like the beginning of an unwelcome chapter. Mom's face was swollen and red in the corner of my screen. Dad was slumped in his chair, refusing to meet the camera's gaze. The news was bad, delivered with an operatic flourish of despair. Dad's accounting firm had imploded. After more than 20 years of steady employment, he was out, with no severance, no parachute, and the sickening realization that they had absolutely zero savings. The crushing weight of the mortgage on the Maple Ridge house, combined with the accumulated balances of their credit cards, was about to pull them under. "We're ruined, Naomi," Mom wailed, her voice thick with self-pity, perfectly calibrated to induce maximum guilt. Your father worked so hard. How could this happen? But she didn't linger on Dad's misfortune for long. The conversation swiftly pivoted. You're doing so well, sweetie. You're our lifeline. We need you. She began deploying the nuclear codes of family obligation. Family is everything, followed by the kicker. The eldest daughter is supposed to sacrifice. The unspoken mandate was clear. My life, my income, and my future were now secondary to the immediate financial crisis of the Bailey household. I wasn't being asked to help. I was being ordained as the family's savior ATM. I remember staring at the 2,000-square-foot house in the background of the call, a house too big for 3 people, filled with decades of consumption they couldn't afford. My own 600-square-foot apartment felt like a fortress of independence I was being asked to abandon. I wrestled with the choice, the promising career path in Denver versus the suffocating sense of duty Mom was expertly using to reel me back in. In the end, duty won. I applied for a remote work transfer, packed what felt like my independent identity into storage, and told my parents I'd be back in Maple Ridge for a few months, just long enough to stabilize things. That few months promise felt like a lie the moment I crossed the Ohio state line. The permanent guest and the empty ledger. When I arrived, the chaos wasn't just financial, it was existential. Dad was catatonic, spending his days watching cable news, ostensibly researching job prospects, but never actually applying for anything. Mom was too busy managing her anxieties to manage the household. And then there was Lena. My sister, Lena, was 26 years old, 3 years my junior, and hadn't been genuinely employed since a short stint at a local coffee shop in college. She was still living at home, claiming she was searching for the right fit, a search that primarily involved sleeping until noon, performing intricate skincare routines, and doom-scrolling through social media before meeting friends for expensive, aimless outings. She was an adult living the life of an extended adolescent, completely untouched by the financial crisis engulfing the house. I immediately established the terms. I would transfer $3,200 every month, enough to cover the mortgage, utilities, and a reasonable food budget. The strict condition was that everyone had to tighten their belts, cut the lavish spending, and start contributing. Lena had to find a job. The initial agreement dissolved faster than salt in water. The $3,200 quickly ceased being a generous contribution and became the expected baseline. If I was a good daughter, the money would appear on the first of the month. Any spending beyond that seemed to carry no mental friction for them. Naomi, we're out of those imported specialty crackers Lena likes, Mom would say with a shrug. Transfer $50. My old tires won't pass inspection, and I need the car to look for a job. Lena would plead, lying poorly. Transfer $300. They would casually borrow my Prime account for instant, expedited shopping, or forget to cancel a subscription, always defaulting to my wallet. There was never an inquiry into my own needs, never a question about whether my Lunaris Gate salary was comfortably covering 2 lives, my solitary, cheap existence, and their entire household consumption. The subtext was always the same. You make the money, so you have the capacity. Our needs outweigh your own. I was trapped in a financial echo chamber, my carefully saved funds draining out with the silent hiss of an open valve. The long shadow of favoritism. The true sting wasn't just the money. It was the echo of a lifetime of imbalance. This dynamic wasn't born out of Dad's job loss. It was merely amplified by it. I was always the responsible one. From childhood, I was the one told to be strong, to be sensible, to get it right the first time. When I brought home a 95 on a test, it was met with a nod and a reminder to help Lena with her homework. Lena, on the other hand, was the delicate, beautiful princess, the one who needed private tutors because the regular class was too hard, the one who got hugs and soft assurances when she messed up. My successes were expected. Lena's existence was celebrated. I was the sturdy oak. She was the fragile, ornamental flower. When I was 12, I saved up my allowance for 4 months to buy a decent bike. When Lena saw it, she threw a dramatic tantrum. By the end of the day, Mom had taken my bike, saying, "Lena needs to learn responsibility, and she needs this more than you do right now." My protests were dismissed with the familiar refrain, "You're strong, Naomi. You can handle this." That pattern never broke. My career, my savings, my apartment in Denver, they were all viewed through the same lens. External resources available for the family's use. They saw my drive, my financial acumen, and my willingness to help as an inexhaustible collective asset, not a personal achievement earned through endless hours of effort. The cumulative sense of injustice was like a low-grade fever that never broke. I loved them. Yes, but the love was poisoned by the undeniable reality that they valued my utility over my personhood. I was talking scaffolding for their comfort. Still, I persevered, clinging to the hope that once the financial ship was righted, they would see my sacrifice and things would normalize. I kept quiet. I kept transferring the money. And I kept believing that if I endured the current pain, the family dynamic would eventually heal. I was wrong. Their theft of the $10,000 for a vacation proved that the dynamic wasn't just broken, it was predatory. The realization solidified. They weren't waiting for things to get better. They were simply waiting for me to print the next batch of cash. The air in the house in Maple Ridge was always thick with unacknowledged debt. My room, which was also my remote office, was the only clean, well-lit space, a small island of productivity in a sea of domestic stagnation. It was late evening. I was deep into an algorithm design for Lunaris Gate, chasing a deadline that demanded absolute focus, when a soft, almost tentative knock sounded on the doorframe. It was Mom. She stood there, wringing her hands, employing her signature gentle vulnerability that I knew, from 29 years of experience, was the prelude to a financial request. "Naomi, sweetie, can you come down to the kitchen for a minute?" she asked, her voice sugary and low. "Just a quick chat about the grocery money." I sighed internally, closing the complex spreadsheet on my screen. I didn't need a minute to know what the chat was about. The $3,200 I transferred on the 1st of the month was supposed to last 30 days. It was the 20th. In the kitchen, the scene was predictable. Lena was sprawled over the breakfast bar, bathed in the blue light of her phone. She was scrolling through Instagram, her face animated by images of high-end food. "Look, Mom," Lena said, not even glancing up. "The Wellington Steakhouse just posted this ribeye with bone marrow butter. We haven't had a decent steak in ages. Can we just order in for once?" Mom turned to me, her expression instantly shifting to distressed. "The thing is, honey, the food budget is completely depleted. I don't know how it goes so fast. But Lena has been having such a tough time lately, not finding work. Would you mind just tossing in a little extra? Just enough to treat her to one nice meal? We need to keep her spirits up." The request was framed as an act of maternal kindness, never as a failure of budgeting or management. It was simply an emotional necessity that I, the money machine, was expected to fulfill. I leaned against the counter, folding my arms. I felt the familiar burn of injustice rising. "Mom, I transferred the full $3,200 on time. That is more than enough to feed 4 people for a month, even accounting for the mortgage and bills. We agreed to be thrifty. If we're out of money on the 20th, it means you're still buying specialty cheeses and high-end organic snacks that we simply cannot afford right now." Lena finally dropped her phone onto the counter with a dramatic thud. She looked genuinely annoyed that her comfort had been interrupted by a discussion of facts. "Oh, please, Naomi, don't be ridiculous," she scoffed. $3,000 for 4 adults in this economy? That's barely surviving. You work in tech. You know what the cost of living is. You're making excellent money. It's no hardship for you to float us a little extra. Honestly, it's not my fault you're cheap." Her words, "You're making excellent money," felt like the ultimate dismissal of my contribution. My labor was merely an infinite resource pool, not something earned. I decided to stop playing their small, manipulative game. I decided to pull out the bigger card, the one they always avoided. Fine, if 3,200 isn't enough for survival, then we have a fundamental problem with our fixed costs, I said, looking straight at my parents. The solution isn't to ask me for more money every 10 days. The solution is to sell this house. We need to liquidate, move down to Clearwater Bay, Florida. Mom looked horrified, clutching her chest. Sell our house? Naomi? Are you insane? Where would we go? We'd go to Aunt Ruth's, I explained, my voice steady. Aunt Ruth, Dad's older sister, owned a small motel and diner operation down in Florida. She has apartments available above the motel, and she's offered to give Dad and you a job in the diner to work off your initial debt. It's hard work, but it's guaranteed income, and we'd be free of this mortgage. The response was immediate and visceral. Absolutely not, Mom shrieked, her soft demeanor instantly gone, replaced by raw panic. I will not be a waitress. I didn't raise my girls to watch me scrubbing toilets and flipping burgers. That's beneath us. But I saw the truth behind the class anxiety. Mom feared Ibar, but I knew her deeper fear. She was terrified of Aunt Ruth. Aunt Ruth was a pragmatic, no-nonsense businesswoman who would demand accountability. She would force Lena, who would be living under the same roof, to actually contribute, to actually work. My mother's opposition wasn't about dignity, it was about protecting Lena's comfortable dependency. I turned to Dad, hoping for a shred of objectivity. Dad, what do you say? A real fresh start? He shuffled his feet, avoiding my eyes. He was the perpetual fence-sitter, always siding with the path of least conflict, which currently meant siding with Mom and Lena's inertia. Naomi, your mother has a point. We shouldn't have to rely on anyone else, especially Ruth. We're all contributing here, he mumbled, his voice a weak defense of the status quo. We'll tighten the belt. We don't need to panic and sell the house. Contributing? I felt the heat rise in my face, a pressure cooker of a year's worth of repressed resentment finally finding a vent. I'm sorry, Dad, but what exactly is your contribution? I wake up early to make breakfast for everyone. I work a full-time, high-stress job from my bedroom. I handle all the tax paperwork. I pay every single bill. And I transfer the money that pays the mortgage on a house that you won't even consider downsizing. What is Lena's contribution exactly? Does she get credit for rinsing her own single coffee cup in the sink sometimes? For remembering to toss her laundry in the basket once a week? Lena bristled, her voice tight with wounded pride. I'm looking for a job. That's stressful. Mom immediately stepped in, her body language a shield protecting Lena. Now you're just attacking your sister. You're making a huge deal out of a little steak dinner. You're overreacting. Lena is sensitive. Don't hurt her feelings. The old phrase, don't hurt her feelings, hit me like a physical blow. It was the motto of my childhood. Every time I had ever stood up for myself, every time I had questioned the blatant favoritism, I had been shut down with the reminder that I was the strong one, and Lena was too delicate for reality. It was a lifetime of being told my emotional pain was irrelevant compared to my sister's fragile ego. The argument was over. I had lost. Not because my financial logic was flawed, but because the family operated on emotional blackmail, a currency I was apparently obligated to accept. I looked at all three of them, Mom's anxious protectiveness, Dad's weary complicity, and Lena's indignant self-pity. There was no reasoning left. I turned wordlessly, walked out of the kitchen, and went back upstairs to my room. Instead of returning to my game algorithm, I opened a blank file in Excel. I named the tab, The Ledger. My hands were shaking slightly as I began meticulously entering data. The original $3,200 monthly transfers, followed by the dates and amounts of every requested extra bit for groceries, gas, doctor's copays, and Lena's various emergency shopping needs. I started cross-referencing my bank statements with the texts I had saved. Every transaction, every conversation, every ridiculous request was being recorded, documented, and systemized. I was designing an economic model, but this time, the world was not fictional. This time, I was quantifying my own life as a financial obligation. It was the first cold, calculated step of the plan. I was done being the victim of their emotional budgeting. Now, I was preparing the official audit. The atmosphere in the Maple Ridge house had been prickly ever since the disastrous kitchen confrontation. I kept to my room, updating the ledger, and they kept to the living room, avoiding eye contact. Then, a few days after the ribeye argument, I noticed the silence was different. Lena was gone. "Where is she?" I asked Mom, standing in the hallway, my voice deliberately neutral. Mom busied herself stirring instant coffee, her back mostly to me. "Oh, she's just staying with a friend, getting a change of scenery. You know how sensitive she is after our little chat." The way she emphasized little chat made it sound like I was the aggressor who had driven Lena to temporary exile. She wouldn't meet my gaze, which was all the confirmation I needed that something was off. Lena didn't have friends who lived far enough away to warrant a multiple-day vanishing act. I retreated to my desk, opened my laptop, and navigated to my least favorite social media platform, Instagram. And there she was. Lena's stories was the first thing that popped up. It was a sun-drenched, high-contrast video. Lena, wearing a massive, wide-brimmed hat and oversized sunglasses, was reclined on a pristine white lounger, a bright blue cocktail in hand, the sound of gentle waves washing over the audio. The geotag was a 5-star resort in St. Aurelia. The caption was exactly the smug declaration of entitlement I'd expect. I deserve this life. Simultaneously, the family group chat began to throb with excitement. The tone was deliberately giddy, a performance for me. They weren't just showing me the trip. They were flaunting their good fortune, making sure I knew they were living large. Dad posted a photo of a breathtaking beachfront dinner, lobster, imported wine, the whole theatrical arrangement. Mom added a video tour of a massive hotel suite, complete with a soaking tub big enough for 2 people. "Can you believe our luck?" Mom typed, using a string of excited emojis. "Lena won that online contest. This resort is unbelievable. Everything here is so luxe." "It's truly a special trip," Dad added. "A very lucky break for us all." I leaned back in my chair, the sight of the tropical opulence jarring violently against the worn carpet of my Ohio bedroom. A lucky contest prize might cover the flight and maybe a standard room, but it absolutely would not cover private suite upgrades, multiple 5-star dinners, spa treatments, and the kind of high-end shopping Lena was prone to. My parents and Lena didn't have a dime of disposable income. Their combined bank accounts were practically empty, a fact I knew intimately from checking their status before transferring their monthly allowance. This kind of trip, even with a discounted room, would run into the high thousands of dollars. The uneasy knot in my stomach tightened, and just as I was about to call Lena and demand answers, my business line rang. It was an unfamiliar number, flagged as bank security. I answered with a dry throat. The voice on the other end was the same smooth, professional one I'd heard at the airport days later. "Ms. Bailey, we have been monitoring suspicious activity on your visa signature. I see you've been traveling." "I have not," I stated flatly. "Well, we are seeing a significant volume of transactions, all premium, high value, over the past 3 days. The total is now just over $10,000, the agent reported, listing the exact businesses I'd just seen in the family chat: the Grand Azure Resort, the exclusive beach club, the designer handbag retailer, all originating from St. Aurelia. We need to know if these are authorized purchases." The sheer magnitude of the theft, $10,000 in 3 days, temporarily stole my breath. It wasn't a small cash withdrawal. It was a complete liquidation of my available credit for pure, unadulterated pleasure. I checked my physical wallet. My card was right where I always kept it. It hadn't left my side. The numbers, the expiration date, the CVV code. The realization was immediate and sickening. Lena must have found my card when I was asleep or in the shower. Quickly snapped a photo of both sides and used those details to book and pay for the entire lavish vacation online. Knowing the physical card was still in my possession, it was not just theft. It was premeditated fraud. My resolve hardened into steel. I had covered debt. I had tolerated neglect. I had accepted the emotional cost of being their ATM. But this was a violation of trust so complete, so arrogant, that it shattered the last remaining glass ceiling of my tolerance. I hung up the line with the bank, telling them to hold the fraud proceedings for a moment, and dialed Lena's cell number directly. It rang for a long time before she answered, the sound of her voice barely audible over loud, thumping club music, and the faint crash of waves. "Naomi, is everything okay? I'm kind of busy," she drawled, sounding bored and slightly buzzed. "No, Lena, nothing is okay. You just spent over $10,000 of my money in St. Aurelia. I know you took my card details. I know the trip wasn't a contest prize. You need to explain yourself." Lena actually giggled, a carefree, infuriating sound. "Oh, that? Yeah. Sorry about that. Look, it was just temporary. I was going to pay you back, eventually." She sounded utterly unconcerned. "I just needed a boost, you know? And you haven't left the house in forever. You never use that card for anything fun. Think of it as me enjoying life for both of us." The casual entitlement was breathtaking. She saw my money not as my earned labor, but as stagnant resources she was entitled to reallocate. "This isn't borrowing, Lena. This is theft. This is wire fraud, which is a felony. Do you understand the severity of this?" My voice remained even, chillingly devoid of hysteria. "Don't be so dramatic, Naomi. We're family. What's the big deal? If you make a fuss, it's going to ruin the family harmony," she threatened, using the ultimate emotional weapon against me. "You don't want to be the one to do that, do you?" That phrase, ruin the family harmony, always used to paralyze me. It was the reason I stayed, the reason I paid, the reason I kept quiet. But this time, it was a joke. The harmony was an illusion, a lie built on my servitude. "Consider the harmony officially ruined. Lena," I said, my voice quiet but final. I hung up. I immediately called the bank back and authorized them to proceed with the fraud claim. The moment the agent confirmed the lock was engaged, and the investigation was officially starting, I felt a release, not of anger, but of the immense, crushing weight of obligation. I was no longer choosing to endure. They had crossed the line from dependency to criminality, and in doing so, they had given me permission to finally stop being their victim. The rules of engagement had changed. This wasn't a family squabble anymore. It was an economic calculation, and I was about to collect. A few hours after I sent my text and locked the card, the fragile peace of the house shattered. My bedroom door didn't just open, it was shoved inward with a force that rattled the frame. Mom and Dad stumbled in, their faces ashen, the color completely drained from them. They looked less like concerned parents, and more like targets who had just heard the whiz of the bullet passing their heads. "Naomi, what did you do?" Mom gasped, her breath catching in her throat, her voice high and ragged. "You have to turn it back on. You have to unlock the card right now." Dad held his phone, the speakerphone emitting a chaotic, hysterical shriek that I immediately recognized as Lena. "They're talking to the police. Security has me cornered in the duty-free lounge." Lena's voice was distorted by the phone's tiny speaker and the sheer volume of her panic. "They said they're filing charges for fraud. Tell them it was authorized. Naomi, tell them the card is yours. Just say it's fine. It's nothing. It's just a family misunderstanding. Open the card." I remained seated at my desk, looking up at their frantic, pleading faces. I didn't raise my voice. The cold calm I'd found at the airport was still insulating me. "Did you tell them that I gave you permission to use the card, Lena?" I asked slowly, directing the question to the phone speaker, making sure every syllable cut through her hysteria. Silence, absolute, terrifying silence hung in the room. Heavier than the Caribbean humidity Lena was currently escaping, the silence was the answer. They had all operated on the assumption that I would quietly absorb the damage, that the authority of my name on the card could be misused without consequence. But without my verbal confirmation, my sworn statement to the authorities on the island. Lena's entire shopping spree was now legally identifiable as unauthorized use, a form of grand theft and fraud. The gravity of the situation hit my parents visibly. Their eyes widened, their panic deepening into pure terror, realizing that their little lucky trip had just devolved into international legal trouble. Dad, shaking, managed to speak. We told her to check their accounts first. Did you check your accounts? Mom? Mom fumbled with her phone, logging into her banking app. A fresh wave of despair washed over her face. It's empty. Everything is gone. Lena cleaned us out before she went. She said she needed spending cash for the taxi and little things. There's not enough left for a deposit on a rental car, let alone a lawyer. They were financially neutered. Lena had not only stolen $10,000 from me, she had rendered her parents completely incapable of executing their usual function, the emergency financial mop-up. They were facing the consequences of her recklessness and their dependence with completely bare hands. Mom sank onto the edge of my bed, dissolving into wrenching, self-pitying sobs. But even in her agony, the impulse to deflect was stronger than the impulse to apologize. "This is your fault, Naomi," she choked out, her voice accusing. "If you hadn't locked the card, she wouldn't have been humiliated like this. They wouldn't be talking to the police. You backed her into a corner." I felt a surge of cold fury at the blame shifting. She wasn't angry that Lena had committed a felony against me. She was angry that I had allowed the consequence of that felony to become public and inconvenient. The $10,000 I'd lost was completely irrelevant to her. Only the disruption to their lives mattered. I waited until her sobs subsided slightly before addressing Dad. Dad, however, looked genuinely broken for a moment, staring at the floor, his shoulders slumped. "You're right, Naomi, you're right. We relied on you for too long." It was the closest I'd ever gotten to a pure, unadulterated confession of failure. But even that fragile admission was immediately polluted by the habitual reliance. He looked up, his eyes pleading. "Just help us one last time. Get her out of this. We'll figure the rest out. I promise. Everything will be different when we get back." I let them wallow in their fear and helplessness for another few minutes, letting the silence press down on them. The truth was, this wasn't the first time they'd pushed me to this edge, but it was absolutely the last. The time for empty promises was over. "I will transfer some funds," I finally stated, my voice measured and deliberate. "But understand this, I am not solving the problem. I am providing the minimum necessary lubricant to prevent Lena from being detained in a foreign country, which would be exponentially more expensive and complicated to fix." I pulled up my banking app. "I will transfer $3,000. That is enough for retainer fees for a local lawyer on St. Aurelia, and nothing more. That lawyer must negotiate a settlement. No jail time. Full payment of the $10,000 debt, heavy fines, and a permanent documented black mark on Lena's credit history. This has to hurt. This has to have a consequence." I paused, looking pointedly at Mom and Dad. "The money is going into Mom's account. You two will be the ones calling the lawyer. You two will be the ones hearing the legal definition of fraud from an external expert. You will both be the ones signing the paperwork and facing the cost of her actions. I am not speaking to anyone on St. Aurelia. You handle this." The conditions were non-negotiable. I was forcing them to step into the adult roles they had so long outsourced to me. They had to take ownership of their daughter's crime and the financial chaos they had fostered. They had to listen to a professional describe the seriousness of the situation, a seriousness they had dismissed when I tried to explain it. Mom, desperate, nodded numbly. Dad, already dialing a frantic Google search for St. Aurelia criminal defense, accepted the terms without protest. I hit the button to transfer the $3,000 into Mom's checking account. Then, ignoring the rising volume of their panicked phone calls and whispered arguments, I turned back to my laptop. The transfer was only the opening move. My fingers flew across the keyboard. I opened my email and composed a single, short message to the only person who truly understood the finances of the Bailey family beyond me, Aunt Ruth. The message was direct, the culmination of all the previous months of secret planning, tracking, and waiting. The fraud was the final piece of evidence I needed to justify the nuclear option. "It's the right time," I typed. "Are you ready?" The frenzy of my parents downstairs, scrambling to hire an island attorney with the $3,000 I'd just transferred, was a dull background hum. They were trapped in the immediate fire, oblivious to the fact that the entire foundation of their lives was about to be demolished. My text to Aunt Ruth, "It's the right time. Are you ready?" was the detonator. To understand the full scope of the trap, you have to look back not just to the kitchen confrontation, but to a phone call that took place several weeks earlier, long before Lena packed her bags for St. Aurelia. I was exhausted, mentally hollowed out from the constant financial siphoning. I needed advice that wasn't biased by familial obligation. I called the one person who had always treated money and responsibility with clear, hard logic. Aunt Ruth, Dad's older sister, the owner of the motel and diner operation in Clearwater Bay, Florida. I told her everything. I detailed the 12 months of my life in Maple Ridge, meticulously recounting how much I had transferred, a sum already approaching $35,000. I didn't mince words about the emotional manipulation, the entitlement, and the absolute dismissal of my opinions. Ruth listened, her voice gravelly and calm, asking sharp, specific questions about the mortgage and the debt structures. When I finished, she didn't offer sympathy. She offered a truth bomb. "That house, Naomi," she said finally, "the one they call our home, it's not theirs. It hasn't been theirs for over 10 years. My blood ran cold. "What are you talking about, Aunt Ruth? They still pay the mortgage. I'm paying the mortgage." Ruth explained that when my parents had faced an initial foreclosure crisis years ago, just after Lena graduated college, she had stepped in to save their credit and keep them housed. She had secretly bought the property outright from the bank, using her business assets, and then essentially rented it back to my parents at a rate that matched the old mortgage payments they couldn't even manage then, and certainly not now. "The deed is in my name, Naomi. It always has been," Ruth confirmed. "They think they own it. They treat it like an asset. They use the emotional leverage of our house to keep you coming back. But legally, they're just tenants. I've been carrying that water for a decade, waiting for them to finally stand on their own 2 feet." The realization was staggering. For all those years, the supposed emotional anchor of my family, the house they were too proud to sell, the asset they were fighting to maintain, was nothing but a generous, undisclosed loan from Ruth. My parents' emotional attachment was rooted in a financial reality that hadn't been true for over 10 years. They had zero legal power over the property. This completely changed the game. My failed suggestion to sell the house in the kitchen confrontation, Part 3, wasn't just dismissed. It was irrelevant. Ruth held the ultimate control. Together, we constructed the escape plan, a beautiful piece of financial and legal architecture. If my family continued its parasitic behavior, Ruth would finally exercise her legal right. She would sell the house. The proceeds would first cover the remaining old debts that had accumulated, and any remainder would be reinvested into her business in Florida. In return, I would be completely released from all financial obligation to them, free to reclaim my own life. Ruth viewed it as a necessary economic intervention for my well-being. My part of the bargain was to establish a flawless paper trail. I began compiling evidence not just for my own benefit, but for Ruth's lawyer. I created the file Receipts, a grim, systematic inventory of their failures. This was far more detailed than my initial Excel ledger. I included full bank statements showing every single wire transfer totaling the $38,000 I'd provided over the year. Screenshot evidence of Mom's and Lena's text messages requesting money for arbitrary, non-essential items. Emails detailing their refusal to seek employment or reduce unnecessary fixed costs. My meticulous tax filings proving my full-time employment and their zero income. I was building a narrative not of an ungrateful daughter, but of an economic asset being systematically exploited. A case that stood up to legal scrutiny. Ruth, operating with the cold precision of a veteran businesswoman, worked with her lawyer to draft the ultimate settlement package. This wasn't a choice. It was an ultimatum. If my parents and Lena wanted to avoid being evicted and dealing with the inevitable financial ruin and lawsuits that would follow, they would have to agree to work in Ruth's motel and diner in Clearwater Bay. The contract stipulated a specific wage, from which a specific portion would be deducted monthly to pay down the cumulative debt they owed. To me, the $10,000 and more, and to Ruth. Crucially, I maintained the illusion of normalcy. Every first of the month, the $3,200 still transferred. I still did the necessary grocery runs. I still answered their mundane questions. I wanted them to feel secure, to be certain of my continued servitude, ensuring they would never suspect the trap closing around them. Ruth had already retained a reputable real estate agent in Maple Ridge. The market analysis was done, the listing paperwork was prepared, and a few pre-qualified buyers were on standby. All of them were waiting for my single, decisive signal. Then the St. Aurelia fraud exploded. When I was on the phone with Ruth, confirming the transfer of the $3,000 for Lena's lawyer, the sheer irony was not lost on me. "It's done," I told Ruth, my voice devoid of emotion. "They're scrambling to hire someone to keep Lena out of jail. They think this is the worst of it. They think I'm still running damage control." Ruth just chuckled, a dry, knowing sound. $10,000 for a vacation. That's a powerful line item. Naomi, did you get any better evidence than that? "I don't need any better evidence," I replied, looking at the frantic parents still arguing over the phone plan. "They committed a crime on my credit card, confirming their complete lack of respect for my boundaries or my financial future. They signed their own death warrant with that fraud transaction." The time for preparation was over. The time for action had arrived. My single text to Ruth, "It's the right time. Are you ready?" was the final quiet act of declaration of war. The silence that fell over the Maple Ridge house a few days later was heavy, toxic, and utterly exhausting. The family had returned from St. Aurelia, not triumphant tourists, but defeated, debt-ridden prisoners. Lena had been released only after the local island lawyer, funded by the $3,000 I sent, negotiated a brutal settlement. It involved the immediate payment of the $10,000 debt, significant fines, and a formal agreement that left her with a permanent, black mark on her credit file, making future independent finance impossible for years. She was saved from a jail cell, but her lifestyle was irrevocably damaged. They stumbled through the front door, looking haggard and travel-worn. My parents were broken shells, aged by the stress of dealing with police, lawyers, and the sudden, humiliating loss of control. Lena, however, still clung to a thread of her usual arrogance. She dropped her designer bags, which she'd had to pay for using the last of Mom and Dad's reserve money after the card lock, and tossed her hair back. "Well," she sighed, collapsing dramatically onto the couch, "at least the trip was worth it. I've never had so much fun." That single sentence, the complete lack of remorse, the final testament to her entitlement, was the trigger. The time for subtlety was over. On the small kitchen table, where we'd had the fateful argument about steak just a week ago, I had placed a large, plain manila envelope. "We need to talk," I said, walking slowly into the living room, my gaze fixed on each of them in turn. Dad noticed the envelope first. He walked over, his movements stiff and hesitant, and pulled out the contents. It wasn't a bill. It was a certified, notarized contract of sale for real property. It bore Aunt Ruth's signature as the seller, the buyer's signatures, and a clear, bold closing date. Today. The blood drained from his face as he read the address. The Maple Ridge house. "What is this?" he whispered, the paper shaking in his hand. "This is a joke. Naomi, what did you do?" "I didn't do anything," I replied calmly. "Aunt Ruth did. I called her in. The house was sold this morning to a lovely young couple. They close in 2 weeks and will be moving in immediately afterward. You no longer have the right to reside here." Mom let out a strangled cry, rushing to grab the paper from Dad. scanning the legal language she didn't understand, but immediately recognized the gravity of, "No, this is our home. Ruth can't do this. We pay the mortgage. We are the owners." Dad immediately pulled out his phone, his hands fumbling to dial Ruth's number in Clearwater Bay. He put her on speakerphone, the only way he knew how to manage confrontation, by letting someone else be the target. "Ruth, what is the meaning of this? You can't sell our house? We're family," he pleaded, his voice cracking. Ruth's voice, coming through the speaker, was dry, devoid of warmth, and utterly professional. "It's been my house for 10 years. Robert, you just paid the rent. You lost the right to call it yours when you nearly bankrupted yourself the first time, and I had to step in. I've carried your burden, hidden your debt, and let you pretend you had stability. I let you use Naomi as your bank for a whole year. That was the final straw. Naomi has given enough. It's time you stood on your own 2 feet, and this is the only way you'll be forced to do it." Ruth ended the call without another word. The shock radiating off my parents was almost palpable. The emotional security blanket they had woven around the house, the core lie of their stability, was brutally ripped away. Lena, however, skipped the devastation and went straight to rage. She jumped up, pointing a trembling, manicured finger directly at me. You're a traitor! This is all you! You told her! You did this to us because you're jealous! You hate that we tried to be happy without you funding every single breath," she screamed, her voice bordering on shrill hysteria. I let her accusations hang in the air. I didn't defend myself. Instead, I calmly walked over to the table and placed a thick stack of printed papers next to the contract of sale. These were the bank statements and email transfers from the past year. "Look at the math, Lena," I instructed, gesturing to the papers. "Look at the total amount I've transferred just in the last 12 months. Mom and Dad shuffled over, staring at the underlined final figure, $38,451.87. The number stood on the page, huge and undeniable, a quantifiable monument to my sacrifice and their entitlement. I then laid out the final, non-negotiable terms, the culmination of my plan with Ruth's lawyer. "You have 2 choices," I said, my voice cutting through the panic. "They are both hard. Neither of them involves this house, and neither of them involves me sending you any more money." I paused, letting the silence maximize the weight of my words. "Choice number 1. You all accept the work contract prepared by Aunt Ruth's lawyer. You will move to Clearwater Bay, Florida, immediately. You will live in the staff apartment above the motel. You, Dad, and Mom will work full-time in the diner and the motel. Your wages will be garnished to pay back the $38,000 I transferred, plus the $10,000 you stole from my card, plus the fines. You will earn your keep and pay your debt. It will be hard labor, but you will have a roof and food." I looked at Mom, who was weeping silently, her hands pressed to her chest. "And choice number 2. You refuse. You stay in Maple Ridge. The new owners will formally begin eviction proceedings in 2 weeks. You will be legally homeless, and without the proceeds from the sale of this house, you will be bankrupt. I will not send a penny to help you find an apartment, and the bank will come after you for any outstanding credit card debt. You will face the consequences of your choices without a net." Mom's silent tears turned into wrenching sobs. I can't be a cleaner. I wasn't born for manual labor." I met her eyes, the years of bottled-up pain finally finding release in a single, perfectly aimed sentence. "And I was not born to be an endless source of cash, paying the price for every poor decision you made." I retorted. "I was told to be strong so you could be weak. Now, the roles are being reversed. Mom, you choose your consequence." The air in the living room fractured. The entire family dynamic, built on the pillars of my silent sacrifice and their comfortable denial, collapsed. For the first time, they were truly cornered. Their manipulation, their emotional pleas, their attempts to deflect blame, none of it could stand up to the cold, undeniable logic of the sales contract and the $38,000 receipt. They had nothing left to bargain with but their pride, and I had just given them a painful but necessary choice. The house, which had just been exposed as a legal fiction, suddenly felt small, cold, and irrelevant. After the climax of the ultimatum, my parents and Lena chose choice number one, the forced relocation and labor contract under Aunt Ruth's supervision. They chose the hard road of work over the immediate destitution of bankruptcy and eviction, but the choice was made with defeated resignation, not repentance. I spent the next 48 hours dismantling my life in Maple Ridge. My packing process was swift and clinical. I gathered my few personal items, my laptop, my external monitors, a handful of favorite books, and 2 small suitcases of clothing. As I looked around the room, I had a stark realization. Nearly every expensive or large item in the house, the new flat-screen television, the fancy coffee maker, Lena's high-end armchair, was something I had paid for, yet none of it was truly mine. It was all collective debt and collective consumption, a physical representation of my role as the financier, not the family member. Outside, the moving van arrived. I had scheduled it to handle the logistics for everyone, meticulously labeling and separating the items. My parents' and Lena's possessions, the heavy furniture, the decades of accumulated possessions, were slated for the small, utilitarian apartment complex behind Ruth's Motel in Clearwater Bay, Florida. My own belongings were directed elsewhere, a temporary, fully furnished corporate apartment near the Lunaris Gate offices in Sunvale, a city 3 hours north of Clearwater Bay, where I could finally report to a physical office and put thousands of miles between myself and their drama. Downstairs, the kitchen, once the site of so many financial pleas and arguments, was eerily quiet. It was the heart of the home, a place that used to overflow with Lena's expensive snacks and Mom's preferred imported wines. Paid for, of course, with my funds. I had consciously cleared out everything except the bare essentials: flour, salt, some expired condiments, and basic coffee grounds. The last supper we would share in that house was not a luxurious ribeye or a gourmet meal. It was simple takeout, eaten in silence, the taste of which was less food and more bitter emptiness. My parents were sequestered in the dining room, hunched over Dad's laptop. They were reviewing the employment debt repayment contract that Ruth's lawyer had emailed them. This was not a friendly agreement. It was a stringent legal document. It stipulated hourly wages, from which a non-negotiable portion would be deducted every pay period to slowly chip away at the total debt, the original accumulated debt to Ruth, plus the nearly $48,000 owed to me, my contributions, plus the $10,000 fraud. The contract enforced a minimum commitment of 18 months of service and contained strict clauses against voluntary termination. They weren't moving to Florida for a family favor. They were reporting for duty as indentured labor, bound by law to finally work off their debt. I finished the last of my packing and approached the table. I held 3 small, sealed envelopes. "I have something for each of you," I announced, placing one envelope next to each of them. Inside each was a crisp, printed sheet. On the left side of the page was a verbatim transcript of their most famous line, repeated over and over in texts, emails, and conversations. "Just this once," or "We only need this one time." On the right side of the page was a horrifyingly large number, the cumulative total of those "just this once" requests over the last year, all clearly itemized from my bank statements. It was a cold, hard mirror reflecting their excuses. Lena, reading her sheet, went pale. Her infamous $10,000 vacation was only a fraction of the total. The constant, smaller demands, the endless requests for help this month for clothes, gas, and frivolous spending added up to an amount that far surpassed the cost of her spectacular fraud. She hadn't just committed one crime. She had committed hundreds of micro-betrayals. Dad slowly lowered his paper, letting out a long, shuddering sigh. His eyes were defeated as he looked at me. "We should have protected you, Naomi. We should have been the ones footing the bill, not vice versa." It was the genuine confession I'd always wanted, but it arrived too late. It was a footnote to a chapter I had already decided to close forever. I picked up my final suitcase and walked toward the front door. A taxi was already waiting at the curb. Mom rushed to intercept me, her voice desperate, clutching at my sleeve. "Wait, when you move to Sunvale, who is going to cook for you? Who will take care of you? Who will you talk to?" Her questions revealed her persistent inability to see me as a functioning adult. I was still the daughter she controlled through domestic necessity. I gently detached her hand from my sleeve, my gaze steady. "I have been taking care of myself for a long time. Mom, I was cooking, cleaning, and managing all the finances for this entire household while working a full-time job. The difference now is that I no longer have to take care of everyone else's wallet, too." I stepped out onto the porch, the door closing quietly behind me. I climbed into the back of the taxi, and as we pulled away from the curb, I looked back one last time through the rearview mirror at the house. It wasn't the warm, idyllic home my parents had always claimed it was. It was a cold, empty stage where I had paid too high a price for too long. Now, I was finally trading that expensive set for my own freedom. The next act was mine alone. The change in my life was immediate and dramatic. I was in Sunvale, a vibrant, fast-paced city. Working from the Lunaris Gate Interactive headquarters, I had an actual desk, actual colleagues, and an atmosphere where my only responsibility was the economic stability of a fantasy realm, not my own family. My mind, previously cluttered with the anxiety of bills, debt repayment schedules, and the constant drain of emotional energy, was suddenly clear. My manager noticed the spike in my productivity almost instantly, commenting that my focus had never been sharper. I wasn't tied to the sofa and the chaos of Maple Ridge anymore. I was free. The new phase of my life began with a delivery, a small utilitarian box from Clearwater Bay. It was a text message from Aunt Ruth, containing a series of candid, unflattering photos. Ruth, pragmatic as always, was providing an update on her new workforce. The first photo showed Dad, wearing a generic, slightly ill-fitting blue uniform, diligently mopping the tiled floor of the motel reception area. His back was curved, his expression one of weary concentration. The second was Mom, standing at a commercial stainless steel sink in the diner kitchen, wearing thick rubber gloves, a stack of greasy plates towering beside her. Her face was sweaty, her usual carefully maintained composure completely gone. The final image was of Lena. She was walking quickly across the pool deck, balancing a tray of half-eaten resort food and empty cocktail glasses. Her uniform shirt was slightly damp with sweat, and her beautiful, pampered face was set in a scowl of pure, resentful exhaustion. The glow of St. Aurelia had been replaced by the dull glare of Florida service industry labor. Ruth's accompanying text was short and sharp. "They're starting to realize how much sweat goes into earning $10,000. Naomi, this is real life now." I smiled, a slow, deeply satisfying smile that felt entirely new. This wasn't merely retribution, it was a necessary educational process. They needed to feel the weight of every dollar they had taken. I logged onto an online photo printing service, pulling up the cherished images Lena had posted during her fraud-funded vacation. I selected the most egregious one. Lena, radiant, lying on the sun lounger with a cocktail, the very picture of undeserved luxury. Then, I began my design project, a small piece of psychological art for the family. I created a composite poster. On the left side, I placed the image of Lena at the 5-star resort, laughing, carefree. On the right side, I put one of Ruth's new photos, Lena in her damp, resentful motel uniform, serving trays near the chlorine-scented pool. Between the two contrasting images, I placed the text, stark and unforgiving, in a clean, bold font. "My parents used my card to spend $10,000 on my sister's luxury trip," I replied. "Good vacation." I printed the poster in high resolution, had it professionally framed in simple black wood, and arranged for an overnight courier delivery to Aunt Ruth's motel address. The package included a small, crisp note for Ruth. "A souvenir. Please hang it where everyone is sure to look at it every single shift." That evening, as I was closing my laptop in my new apartment in Sunvale, Ruth texted again, The package had arrived. I could almost hear the silence when they opened it. The framed poster wasn't just a photograph. It was a physical artifact contrasting their fantasy of entitlement with the brutal reality of their debt contract. It was the visual summary of the entire saga. Lena, as predicted, was furious. Ruth's next text confirmed the minor rebellion. Lena tried to rip it down. I stopped her. Then, Ruth sent the final photograph. The poster was hanging prominently on the wall of the employees' dining area, a small, windowless room where my parents and sister would be eating every meager, deducted meal. It was the last thing they would see before clocking in, and the first thing they would see before clocking out. It was a constant, mocking reminder of the precise moment and the precise dollar amount that triggered their financial collapse. It wasn't just a memory, it was a judgment, hung on the wall like a permanent, mocking report card. Watching the photo of the framed poster on my screen, I felt a calm, deep satisfaction. I opened my digital journal and typed the final thought for the day. "Justice isn't always pretty," I wrote, the keys clicking softly. "But it is clear." The passive aggression of "good vacation" had evolved from a cryptic text message to a public framed statement. The revenge wasn't loud or explosive. It was systematic, financially precise, and utterly unavoidable. The debt repayment clock was ticking, and every time Lena or my parents took a break, they would look up and see the picture of the life they had traded away for a 3-day illusion. A few months had passed since I traded the Maple Ridge mortgage for my freedom in Sunvale. Life had stabilized into a satisfying rhythm of complex coding by day and quiet, solitary evenings by night. The dramatic chaos of my family had been replaced by the predictable logic of the algorithms I designed. The only reminders were the weekly text updates from Aunt Ruth, and the slow, consistent deductions hitting my credit card statement as Lena's lawyer finalized the repayment schedule for the $10,000 of fraud. Then came the inevitable request, a group video call, phrased vaguely as a family check-in. I knew exactly what it was. After several months of hard labor, isolation, and forced accountability, the urge to revert to old patterns, to seek absolution, to ask for an emotional lifeline, and perhaps, eventually, to test the boundaries for money, would be irresistible. I agreed, but I logged in from a place of absolute finality. This was not a negotiation for my return. It was a conversation to establish permanent disarmament. When the call connected, the image on my screen was starkly different from the last time I'd seen them in person. My parents were sitting side by side, wearing simple, solid-colored shirts, the kind of inexpensive, durable clothing that signaled utility over style. The frantic tension that had defined their faces for the last year was replaced by a kind of weary resignation. Lena was in the frame too, dressed in the slightly too large navy blue shirt of her diner uniform, a contrast to the designer sundresses she'd worn on St. Aurelia. And there it was, hanging on the wall directly behind them, in sharp focus, despite the video quality, was the framed poster, the contrasting images of Lena in the Caribbean versus Lena in the Florida uniform, the bold, damning title. My parents used my card to spend $10,000 on my sister's luxury trip, I replied. Good vacation. It was a silent, powerful witness to the conversation. Mom spoke first, her voice soft, tentative, and utterly drained of its usual dramatic flair. Naomi, honey, we just wanted to talk. We are so sorry. We are truly, truly sorry for everything. The way we treated you, the money. Dad nodded solemnly. Your mother and I have had a lot of time to think. Ruth is tough, but she's fair. We realize how wrong we were to rely on you like that. You were right about everything. Lena just looked down, picking at a loose thread on her uniform sleeve. Their apologies, though necessary, were not sufficient. They were the key to the lock, but I still had to walk through the door. Stop, I said, holding up a hand. My voice was calm, not angry, but firm enough to stop them mid-sentence. I appreciate you saying that, but I'm going to do something I've never done before. I'm going to talk, and none of you are allowed to interrupt me. You are not allowed to tell me I'm being too emotional, or that I sound dramatic, or that I need to stop making my sister feel bad. I'm going to talk about 29 years of unfairness, and you are going to listen without excuses. The room went silent, held captive by the unprecedented boundary. I started small, recounting the moments that had built the pressure cooker of my resentment. When I was 12 years old, I had my bike taken away so Lena could learn responsibility on my savings. When I scored perfect grades, it was an expectation. When Lena failed, it was a tragedy that required special resources, paid for by me eventually, for my entire life. My success was viewed as collective family property, while Lena's needs were always prioritized as a sacred, individual expense. I looked at Mom. You constantly told me I had to be the stronger one, but what you meant was I had to be the one who never needed anything, the one whose emotional well-being was always secondary to maintaining Lena's comfort. I moved on to the core issue, my voice gaining strength. When Dad lost his job, I came home because I felt genuine love and duty, but you used that duty to bleed me dry. I transferred $38,000 of my hard-earned money and savings, and you used that money as leverage to keep your comfortable, unsustainable lifestyle going. And when Lena took the $10,000 from my card, it wasn't just theft. It was the final proof that you would rather destroy my future than inconvenience your present. I leaned closer to the camera, my eyes boring into theirs. I am not here to hear hollow promises that you've changed. I am here to tell you that the version of me that was your emergency fund, your scapegoat, and your emotional punching bag is dead. She is gone. If this relationship only exists when I'm wealthy enough to rescue you, then this relationship needs to end right here. Mom was crying again, but these tears seemed different, less dramatic, more genuinely sorrowful. How can we make you trust us, Naomi? How can we prove that we are changing? The question was the turning point. You don't prove it to me with words, I said. You prove it with action. You will continue to live by Ruth's contract. You will work your shifts, pay back every penny of the debt, and live on the income you earn. No asking for help, no subtle hints about money, no bringing up how much I used to help to leverage future sympathy. You will never, ever mention my bank account or my salary again. You will stand on your own 2 feet, or we will have zero interaction. That is the only boundary that matters. Lena shifted uncomfortably, and I knew she was about to complain. The work is so much harder than I thought. Naomi, the tips barely cover the fines, and my back hurts every night, and... Her eyes flickered over my shoulder, then darted back to the poster behind her parents. The physical reminder of her own spectacular folly silenced her faster than any argument could have. She took a deep breath. I understand, she finally conceded, her voice small and rough. I'll pay my share. I will. I had achieved my goal. The lines were drawn in permanent ink. The emotional manipulation had failed, and the financial reality had been accepted. I offered them the final, cold comfort. I wish you well, I said, a slight, humorless curve touching my lips. I hope you enjoy your working vacation. It's longer, it's harder, but it is infinitely more fair. I didn't wait for them to respond with any more pleas or vague promises. I simply reached out and ended the call. The screen went blank, ending the chapter with a definitive click. I stood up and walked to the balcony of my new apartment in Sunvale, looking out over the evening skyline, a glittering tapestry of electric lights that signaled a future of my own making. My phone chimed with a new email notification. My bank had officially approved the mortgage loan. The title to a small, new condominium was now solely, legally, in the name of Naomi Bailey. I opened a blank document on my laptop, the screen reflecting the cool lights of the city. I typed the new title of the document, The Epitaph for My Former Life. My parents used my card to spend $10,000 on my sister's luxury trip. I replied, "Good vacation." The story ended not in a tearful, warm reunion, but in the fierce, absolute freedom I had fought for. I was no longer a human credit card. I was an individual, self-sufficient, and finally, financially sovereign. Thank you so much for listening to my story. Let me know in the comments where you are listening from and what your thoughts are on the tough boundaries I had to set. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to Lila Revenge Stories, and hit that hype button to help my story reach more listeners.